Hi Arfat,
Hi, AR.
how are you?
I am okay. How are you?
Good, thanks. I know you just came off another podcast recording just before this, so I hope you're not all podcasted out.
I'm not. I'm not. I am very excited about this.
Uh-huh.
I'm very excited about
Same, because you do a lot of things. You do a lot of things.
Yeah, I do a lot of things.
I'm just going to quickly list them, and I'm sure I'm going to miss a lot of things as well. But you are the co-founder of Soch.
Yeah.
You are
yeah.
the founder of Puffball Studios, which is an animation studio.
Yeah.
You've also, which recently released its first animated film in Pakistan called Shahid Tabassum.
Yeah.
And Hashia is also, is that how you
Hashia.
Hashia, sorry. It's an online platform about history, like Pakistani history.
Yeah. In
What-
Urdu. And then Shahri Pakistan, which is
Shahri
civic
Pakistan.
education, and the umbrella is Engage, which is the think tank. It's the research organization which started everything.
Oh, so that's the big overarching
That's the
thing.
first overarching. Yeah.
What came first?
Engage came first,
Mm-hmm.
but before Engage, I basically have a computer science degree, and Engage essentially is a interdisciplinary research organization.
Mhm.
So I'm at Mosiki first talking about it basically ended up being an academic research organization, only more relevant to local conflicts.
Right.
And what came first in a way was I had a software consultancy that I started when I was 19, and then Salman Taseer was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a turning point in my life, because me and a friend of mine, Zan Molvi, the ex-bassist for Porridge Boy, who's doing his PhD now, we decided to go do tons of research on the blasphemy law.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a couple of years down the line, Engage was formally formed up. And from there, and there's a long story ahead.
Okay, wait, that's a big jump. You were a consultant, a software consultant?
Okay, so here okay, if we have to do this right, so when I'm 16,
Mm-hmm.
I am being trained to be the next leader for Jamaat Islami,
Mhm.
because I come from a family of Jamaat Islami leadership, and I've grown up in a very conservative household. I've grown up as a very conservative kid who thought music is haram, film is haram, everything is haram.
Mm-hmm.
And then I fall in love,
Mhm.
and then I realize, hey, I want to learn music because I can't seem to express what I feel in words. So I learned a bit of music, and then dramatic things happen, and that is taken away from me because I come from a conservative, lower middle class background at that time, and I figured, you know what, I'm gonna make shit ton of money. And so this is second semester of college.
Yeah.
So I started a software consultancy.
Where did you go to college?
Fast Lower.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was and I was good at it. I was good as an entrepreneur. I was doing interesting work, but even some would call meaningful, because I was into AI, data mining, and inventory predictions, all kind of things that seem like centuries away now.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think I knew that I wanted to retire by 30. That was the goal, and do what I really wanted to do. And at that time, I wanted to do some welfare work, quote unquote,
Mhm.
just in a very abstract sort of way, because I'd seen my parents do it their whole life. But I was also changing from coming from someone from Jamia, then growing into my own person. And then that incident happened, Salman Taseer versus Mumtaz Qadri, and all of a sudden I see my parents endorsing what Qadri did, and I can't figure it out. I can't figure out how could love look like this? How could love for the Prophet have violence in it?
Mm.
And that started everything, including every film, every venture starts from there. My need to resolve my inner anxiety, I create a better relationship with how do I relate to my parents, how do I relate to this mitti, how do I relate to the people, how do I call them all barbaric, violent people, or do I figure it out? So that's when we got together, we wrote an academic paper, got published in a humanities journal. They made an exception for us, even though I was from computer science, he was doing law. I got offered a PhD program, but I decided that I'm gonna formalize this as a process, what we did. And that's what Engage was. Now, once we were done with our first project, which was with Princeton on the blasphemy law, the report ended up being 400 pages long, and I was like, no one's gonna read this. Like, that's the whole problem with the development sector and academia. It's not accessible. That's when animation came in, because I wanted to animate what was in the report, make it accessible. So we enacted parliamentary session from the 80s, and that's when I decided that we also need Urdu content that is accessible. So we're talking about human rights, And somehow there's something very arrogant about the idea that why don't you know what human rights are, to someone in a seminary or even in a school when there's nothing available in Urdu on any civic rights issue. आइन क्या होता है, आपके हुकूक क्या हैं, क्यों हैं, कहाँ से आए हैं. So that's where Shehri started, and that's where my interest in design also started. Meanwhile, music was my first love, so I was scoring things just for myself, and so Shehri and Engage was going in parallel, and that's when I wanted to do the same thing that I did with Shehri. It blew up. We have 1 million followers. It was doing well. I also wanted to do the same thing for history that we did for civic education. That's where Hashia came in. Somewhere down the line, I had this genre of filmmaking in mind, that what we're doing is we were also monitoring hate speech for certain organizations around the world to figure out what does it look like online. So at the intersection of a very radical Islam and at the intersection of technology and fascist government came a series of stories that we call cyberpunk or cyber khilafat in our case. What are our anxieties? And that's where Shehri Tabassum was born out of. And so we decided to have a separate studio that would do high-end animation, hand-drawn, would be Puffball, and all the motion work would be separate with Shehri Pakistan. So that's how Shehri Tabassum was released, and I got to do the score for that, which was a dream for me. Wanted to do a score for a film. No one was going to hire me. I can always hire myself.
Yeah. So that's how I like to work as well.
Yeah. So that was fun. So, and now Swipe, which is going to come in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. That's crazy. That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and Soch Videos was basically just I co-founded it, but I'm not. I can't credit myself for the great work that they're doing from time to time because I'm not handling the operations. But everything else is in Lahore, and it's just one big team. It's an excellent team. COVID happened, but I think it was an exceptional time still. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things I'm interested in just right off the bat. But as this is a Mosiki podcast, and you said your first love was music in some ways because it was the forbidden fruit in some way. So what was your first experience with music coming from a conservative background?
So obviously there were these ideas in my head that I came from a very severely patriarchal family, that this is what women should look like, this is the role of a man, woman. So music was one of those things that it's haram. And it was very clear to me that it's haram, and I was an intelligent kid, and so I had figured it out in my head why it is haram as well. So there were 2 television channels allowed at our place, which was BBC and CNN. So my parents are from Bangladesh, East Pakistan, so they not have good Urdu at all. So English is something that we were always taught, and they knew as well. So CNN and BBC, whenever the sound IDs would come in, that was the first thing that I would feel like, that's music, you're listening to it, sounds pretty cool, especially BBC.
What, the intro jingle of BBC?
Yeah. And
it's a banger.
Yeah. And I was like, it's a melody, it's got rhythm, and it gets you excited, it's stimulating, why are you listening to it? And it doesn't seem it. And then some documentaries, and documentaries would have exceptional, especially nature documentaries, sometimes exceptional soundscapes and
ambience.
Ambience. And so my first love was with soundscape-like music and ambient music, because I think it also felt more kosher. That
there's no lyrics in there.
Yeah, it's halal. There's no beat. It seems more halal, more nature-like. But I think so. That was my first.
You don't get like hip hop wildlife documentary.
Yeah, you're not gonna get on the dance floor. To a documentary soundtrack. But what I realized was that there was intuitively. I mean, I had no musical training. I could create things in my head. So at that time, I didn't have any training. I figured I have something to say. I have a voice, and it's authentic. It's in my head. So I would spend half an hour just thinking in my head that this is not, now this instrument comes in, because by that time I didn't know what an orchestra is, what does a cello sound like, and now this instrument comes in, and I had a lot of fun with that. But it's only when I fell in love is when things really took shape, because I think overall I figured out, okay, this can't be wrong, what I want to say cannot be wrong. And that wasn't an intellectual decision, it was an intuitive, very clear decision. So I think, remember, the first thing that I wrote, in my college, a lot of seniors were musicians, including Zulfi. So Zulfi came to me and I said, I have this melody in my head, and I would sing it to him. I was like, that's a very nice melody. It's like, I don't have an instrument. He's like, use your laptop. So he installed Free Loops for me, and he gave me a few samples. And I said, I want a tabla as well. So he gave me a few tabla samples. So I remember the first thing that I wrote was just a few piano melodies with the tabla. And it was really easy to write on something that's a template already for you. It's on a 4x4. It was pretty nice. I showed it to him. He was like, it's very good. So that's how it started. And partly, I think, when I was like, I'm going to make some music, one of the first things was I'm going to make my own recording studio, just so that for myself, I can make some music. I was pretty clear that it's not probably going to be something I'm professionally going to be able to pursue. I did get into a couple of bands, The Rising and Topi Drama. I was just open up for a few acts here and there. But that's how it started, and I kept it from my family for a very long time. And I think eventually music was the least of their concerns. When I started doing work on Blasphemy, that was much more of an antagonistic thing. But by now they're pretty, they've accepted that at least whatever he has to say is authentic, even if we disagree with it. Even the music, and that the music doesn't have any fahashi in it. You know, it's not. It doesn't sound like something like that guys and girls are gonna get it on with. It's pretty grim.
It can still score a nature documentary even now.
Yeah. Although I don't show them everything. So I have a huge love for funk music, and so we do a lot of jams at the office. So they don't know that side of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So why do you think the Salman Taseer incident had such a big impact on you?
Because I have always have and continue to love the Prophet a lot. So I was like, मैं आशिक रसूल हूँ, मुझे इश्क है, मुझे प्यार है, मुझे मोहब्बत है. So if I love that person, and they are telling me that there's only one way to love, and I think fundamentally, one thing that stays to this day and is informed even both the films, the documentary that we're doing, is the corruption of expression and language. The idea that I could see that violence was being, there was something very insidious hidden under violence, that violence was veiled under this idea of an ethical good. Honor, killing, ishq rasool, violence. It was almost Orwellian already. Like, how could violence be honorable? How could you kill someone for love? And for me, that anxiety, A, of what's going on, B, of my identity, that no, I want to be a musician, I want to be an ally, I want to be these things. Most importantly, I want to be able to call myself an Ashiq Rasool and condemn this person in this act. How do I do that? So I was working with human rights activists, but at a personal level and at an academic level, I also then pursued the history of Islamic jurisprudence and figured out that we've pretty much been lied to for the past 30 years. And that's the central thesis of a very systematic way of the ways, powers that we have obfuscated the reality of our history and tradition, the Islamic legal tradition, and twisted it at various instances. And to now, there's only one way in Pakistan that you could love. I felt like the whole of, so I grew up in Iqbal Town. मुझे लगा पूरा Iqbal Town was just filled with anxiety. कि मैं पूरी तरीके से I'm not in agreement with what has happened, but no. Gustakhi Rasool ki ek hi sada, sar tan se juda. At the same time, they're going to say it. So that anxiety overall, I felt like there's something behind it, and I want to resolve it. But that, I think that's why it had a huge effect on it. It was a huge shift for the whole community, for the whole country. I mean, last election was pretty much, fought on these ideas.
Right.
Who loves the Prophet more? I mean, if I open a pawn shop, which is like Mumtaz Qadri pawn shop, मैं तो करोड़पति बन जाऊंगा. It's like it's very easy to use these language and these expressions and corrupt it. And that's why Shariat Tabassum, the idea of a smile, which is a beautiful thing, love.
Can you explain the plot briefly of Shariat Tabassum?
Yeah, so Shariat Tabassum is a dystopian animated film set in 2071, and it's a film. It's a Pakistan that has seen civil war, and they're finally in a time of peace. And however, they have only one regulation on an expression, which is you're only allowed to smile, and any other expression other than smile is criminalized. And for me, it was an allegory to what we are experiencing right now with love and honor. Beautiful things that have been corrupted. And when you force one word to hold only one meaning, then no matter how beautiful that idea is, if love cannot mean, plant a tree, dance, the tasawwuf way, the Sufi way of love, or the musician, it only means one thing. it will become an instrument of control. Similarly, smiling, it's a beautiful idea, but if you force it to hold one meaning of loyalty and gratitude, then it becomes an instrument of control. So that was the allegory and the principle, the idea behind which, like, I felt like I cannot talk about it directly, but what this genre allows me to do is maybe explore our anxieties. And that was very important. It should be about us. It's not about Japanese anxieties. So it's not the cyberpunk anxiety of technology. No. It's the cyberpunk anxiety of, which is why we call it cyber khilafat. Okay, the anxieties that we experience at a time of great strife and a great clampdown of expression in the name of religion and love of profit, love of nation, love of the state. So that's how the smile becomes an allegory to love and honor and all forms of expression, that if you want, no matter how beautiful that expression is, you can corrupt it by confining it to only one meaning.
While we're on the subject of animation, do you want to also quickly talk about Swipe? Because that's all of these things in one.
Yeah. So Swipe I'm very excited about Swipe. So Swipe is also, for me, a cyberpunk film in the sense it's high-tech, low-life, and like it's however set in contemporary day Multan. So it's a much more grittier, realistic take on the city. The only fictional element is that there's an app called iFatwa, and what happens is that people can crowdsource fatwas. So they send a case and it comes to your phone, and you swipe right for Wajib al-Qatl and you swipe left for Maafi. And the initial premise, I came to the office, I was like, you know what, we're going to make a film for it's Tinder for Muftis. But the thing is, it gets out of hand for Muftis and children get addicted to it. So that's the premise of the film. It becomes a game, and there's an Ajr board and there's a Ghazi board, and children want to become Ghazis through that app. So it's gamified and it becomes a mockery of what it was meant to be. So it is an animated film, hand-drawn again, beautifully hand-painted. It looks beautiful. I can say very confidently. Narratively speaking, we'll figure out once it's done how people respond to it. It's going to be out on 31st. It's going to be out October, yes.
Oh, soon.
Yeah, it's going to be out on YouTube, no festivals. So it's not for white people to watch it for a year and a half before our own people see it. We will still submit it to festivals who allow non-premiered festivals. But
white people, you can still watch it.
Yeah, sure, sure, if you must. But like, it's for, first and foremost, it's like the accessibility part is crucial for us. So it's going to be out. We can do the screenings. We did a lot of screenings for Sharia Tabassum across universities. That was fantastic. The discussions were fantastic. It was very refreshing. We won't, for COVID, we can't do that, but we might do virtual screenings. We're thinking of doing a guerrilla screening as well. Let's see, like take a truck and let's see about that as well. But there is a theme that still moves forward, that of corruption of language and expression. It's only the other way around. So why do someone gets to decide that love and honor can mean only one thing, and then that becomes instrument of control? But there's an extreme opposite of it, and this is a linguistic study as well, so it's research proven as well, that if you allow a word to hold infinite meanings, so if you're a blasphemer or if you are a traitor, that anybody can say, you know what, you spilled tea, that's blasphemy because God, that's nemat kharab kar rahe ho aap. So the idea that you allow anyone to interpret anything as those extremes are defined by this segment of the society. And so we felt as a team, we want to say something about it. That's a scream of either agreement, passionate agreement, but so it's also
a live studio audience is completely agreeing.
I think that's an endorsement. I would take that as an endorsement. But yeah, so Swipe would be out 31st, and I think, if nothing else, I think it's a very authentic, very courageous voice of the whole team collaboratively, and we're projecting very confidently, where our voice is just there.
Sorry, dude.
That's okay. That's all right. That's okay.
Usually doesn't happen.
I imagine, because I've seen most of your interviews.
Yeah.
There should be like a plug-in, like baby voice remover.
है ना?
Just a DSR होता है उसका.
Yeah, exactly.
It just removes all
removes the babies.
Yeah, all the annoying babies are out.
Remove
the babies. That sounds like Children of Men and Margaret Atwood का क्या? Yeah. Handmaid's Tale, yeah. what did you have to do? Kya kiya aapne?
He comes back looking like shell shocked. Like, what have I done?
Had to do what I had to do.
You told me to deal with it. It's interesting because you said about Shahid Tabassum, or actually before that you said that you wanted to set up an animation studio so that you could talk about these issues while kind of doing it in a creative way. But Swipe sounds incredibly direct.
Yes. That was the initial idea. The initial idea was, number one, that everything that we're doing is so intellectual. Shehri Pakistan is so intellectual. It's just ideas put forward. Hashia is ideas put forward. Even though that's much more passionate. But there was a lot of dispassionate work happening. And there was a lot of pent-up sentiment, I think, in the whole team, because the whole team is very passionate about it, that we need to tell stories that are fictional and that has more of our gut in it than like analytically. So that was one. And number two was, there are ways to talk about these things without being completely direct about it. I think by the time the idea of Swipe came up, there are a few things which allows us to not make it completely about, because it isn't. There are many ways in which people commit acts of violence and become judge, jury, and executioner. You have your Aurat March and there's one play card and everybody, it almost becomes like a democratization of who gets to be the good woman, who gets to be the bad woman. So in a way, it is something about what the screen does to you. So there are things that people call them, for example, in this case, Aurat March, that if they were in front of them and there were people around them, they would never say it. Something that the screen does, that the film kind of explores as well. And also mob violence is more of a thing than, but it is more direct. I mean,
but you're not that interested in the technological aspect of it, or are you?
I'm interested in context. So I don't have tech phobia at all, but I do have a feeling. The printing press in the early 20th century, late 19th century did a lot of terrible things for radical Islam. It kind of created a lot of reasons for violence in South Asia. So academically, it's been studied as well. So it was a piece of technology that was misused. So if you wanted to write someone's Wajib al-Qatl, you had to handwrite it. So this community is Wajib al-Qatl, this is the kitab. Now if you have printing press, you can print it 1,000 times and it's easier. So that was a milestone in modernity taking over Islam and bringing violence out of it. And I feel like Twitter and social media has done that too much. I've seen it happen too much. I've written papers about it. So I do have that fear that at the intersection of technology and people out for blood, when they just need a reason for it, or thought leaders, political leaders they can use that in that. So I am interested in that, but in this context, which is why ideally, because we want to do a feature-length film for Tabassum as well, we want to do multiple stories I have in mind that explores this idea of technology, radical Islam, and fascist element. So, but in context, in general, technology is what allows us to do what we do. Yeah.
I'm interested in what you're saying about love and violence. I think that's a really interesting aspect of it, because it was, I'll be honest, the first time that I saw Shahid Tabassum, I kind of thought it was I mean, obviously it can be, it's open to multiple interpretations, but I thought it was a commentary on like late capitalism, in the sense that we're all expected to be happy, productive, individuals, and that's what it's sort of, that constant pressure just essentially does feel like you're being forced to smile. But your point about it being like this relationship between love and violence, don't you think that that's something that has always been a part of like any culture from the beginning? There's always this idea of love being associated with violence, because passionate love is like, I would do anything for this love.
Yes.
I would be killed. I would kill for it.
Yeah.
I will do anything. And those kind of things are interlinked. It might be a shame, but they feel connected.
I mean, so for the two things, number one, for Tabassum, we received, and for every member of the team, I don't want to hijack, like at the end of the day, there are multiple layers of meaning. So yeah, there was a lot of critique on capitalism, and there was a lot of critique on surveillance. And we received multiple interpretations from people on body politics, of feminism, on toxic positivity, all of those things. And just big state control in general. So that was like where I was coming from, and doesn't have to take away from anybody's experience. But you're right. So here's the thing. the very passionate love that we talk about, and a lot of times we talk about very immaturely without a lot of self-awareness. There is this term limbic hijack, which
limbic
hijack. There's this Buddhist idea. So the limbic primal part of our brain, which experiences sentiments and emotions that go way back at our flight and fight times when we were just surviving, that we still have, that where we are reacting and not responding. So, the act of passionate murder is a reaction. It's not a response. It's not, hey, I need to have a conversation with you. I cannot be with you anymore. You slept with another person. That's a response. The reaction is you kill someone. So it's always been like that. I agree with you. The thing is how things get scaled up in all of these things. So even when the printing press came in, we did have a lot of misuse of fatwas before that. You have examples of that all the time, but there's only so much you could have done. And then printing press came and it scaled up. Now, love on its own already in South Asia has a history of honor killing, and it gets scaled up even more when you have online internet. Oh, this model did this, and all of a sudden she is our woman to do something violent. And violence obviously does not have to be just physical, linguistically violent. In case of when it becomes love for not even God, because people don't do a lot of, Pakistani people especially, don't commit a lot of act of violence for love for God. They do it for the Prophet a lot. And there's a huge history for it. So for that, I think is very specific to our culture. Because you go to Marrakesh, you go to Jordan, you go to Turkey, you go to Egypt, and you go to 50 years before in Pakistan. Forget 50. Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan singing what he would sing, and Imran Khan with Amitabh Bachchan coming and say it again, and those lyrics being pretty radical. Forget him. Think Iqbal coming in with Shikwa, and think him reading it right now. Something unique has been happening over the past 25 years. It's not organic. It has happened very systematically. So the love for the Prophet becoming violent in a very specific way is very unique to our culture. And different cultures are experiencing these anxieties in different ways. So the white man right now in America is experiencing his anxieties in a very different way. In the 60s, they experienced it in a very different way. There is a manufactured anxiety, or these secular liberal people are going to come in and they're going to change your life, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, we're not going to let that happen. And then they're going to they're going to put everything about, what they're doing is anti-state and anti-Islam. That's all you need to say. Quote unquote love, and which is why love itself is not necessarily a virtue in itself. A lot of horrific things have happened in history because of it, but because I think there's a lack of awareness of how and what the gentleness and tenderness and kindness that should be associated with love, and that I think comes with emotional awareness and maturity. That where do you end and where does this start? So when you commit violence, are you really doing it for the Prophet? Who are you offended for? Because when you ask them, they'll say, his honor, nothing can happen to his honor, but we will take revenge. So what is that need? And that need is a limbic hijack. The anxiety that you experience, the violence that you experience inside, you do not know how to process it. And then the reaction, you have given them a million ways to react in a violent way. Instead of channeling a platform or a way, here's how you can respond instead of react. And other communities are responding. Other Muslim communities are responding. Even when Salman Rushdie came out with a pretty blasphemous, not as blasphemous as people made out to be, book back in '89, Iran was the one and Pakistan was the one that was like really out there. A lot of other Muslim communities had different ways of dealing with that anxiety. So I would say, as universal as it is, yeah, we've been hijacked. Our limbic systems have been hijacked by this, this group of religious activists, state elements, and just people who have something to benefit from people killing each other. And because then stakes are high, you'll get votes. Stakes are high, you'll get money. Stakes are high, you'll get power. That's how it is. I mean, that part's as universal as it goes.
I read a book recently, and it was about drone warfare. And I think I think he was French, but I'm not sure who the philosopher was. But he was talking about the idea of sacrifice and how it's being presented now in culture. So the white man will present, all of a sudden, after having a history of culturally showing sacrifice as this very incredibly noble thing, right? They have a the whole Christ symbology as well. So sacrifice in Menabi is something that's very noble. They've now flipped it and shown it to be actually very selfish and what's the word? You know, just like a cowardly thing to do. Whereas over here, you know, in no way am I just want to say this, in no way am I endorsing or justifying it. I'm just interested in the philosophy of it, that something like a suicide bombing here or is perceived as, you know, I would die for this cause. And on the other side, you have drone warfare, which is the most disembodied you can get away from violence, right? You can apply violence with a touch of a button. It will happen without any loss of life from your own side. So on one hand, you have, I will obliterate myself for this. On the other hand, you will be like as far away from the violence as possible. It's just interesting to me the way the violence is now, the way that it's being perceived in culture, especially with regards to love or with regards to dedication to a cause, right? The more that you distance yourself from the violence, yourself personally, right? I mean, I know we're not talking about, like, blasphemy is not about sacrifice, it's about killing someone else. But it's, do you think that the reason it happens is because of it feels authentic? So it is a bizarre question, but you know.
It's a very good question, actually. It's actually a very good question because it hits the right points of what the claims have been. So number one, this has never been a need in our culture for centuries. It hasn't been a need a real need up until 1986.
The need to
protect and then kill to protect.
Sure.
And in elaborating on that need, our parliamentarians and then judiciary, they flat out lied to us, consistently changed texts. So for example, if a text said, you will not kill someone for insulting the Prophet, they will remove the "not" from it. Consistently happened. That's
really?
Oh yeah, that was the first research, that you have 100+ examples, and every example in the parliament and every example in judiciary in 1991 when passing the law, they would use texts which were saying you will not kill a non-Muslim if they insult the Prophet, because they already are given protection of life and property based on beliefs that are blasphemous. For example, and this is, I'm citing as verbatim as possible, a Zoroastrian says God has an opposite. This is more blasphemous than insulting the Prophet because it's about the God. We don't kill them for that. If we don't kill them for that, we will not kill them for insulting the Prophet. Ranging from that, they cited texts which actually said give them a verbal warning. If they do it again, you can punish them, but you can't kill them. They use those texts to say, these texts say kill everyone. And they said it in 86, they said it in 91, they continue to say it over the past 15 years. So,
and this is what your research has been.
And they're on engagepakistan.com with examples, with citations. They would remove the Arabic word la.
So no way.
Yeah, even verbally speaking. So we have videos in which someone has a text and say la yaqtulu. So you will not kill. They will remove the word la. So you will kill.
Oops.
Yeah, oops, right? So, and this is the 5th most read article on Dawn in the history of Dawn.com, the untold story of Pakistan's blasphemy law, in which the first part that I wrote, in which I put this forward, but the more elaborate report is on the website. But the reason I'm coming to this, and we could come back to this if you need to later, because there's a very good, the thesis people can find very easily written as well, and there are videos as well. There's animation. We made an animation on that parliamentary, exposing the parliamentary proceeding, which text they cited in the parliament, and that was our first animated film, quote unquote, and we showed how that was the text and they misquoted it, etc., etc. But the thing that you said about sacrifice, now the rhetoric around 86, and if you start reading texts, which we read a lot after Rushdie's text, has been about मैं अपनी जान कुर्बान करने के लिए तैयार हूँ. For the love of the Prophet, I'm ready to give my life. The moment when it comes down to it, you'll burn villages, you'll burn communities of the downtrodden and the weak. Invariably. Nothing very sacrificial about that, A. B, but they've still used that language and that archetype as the ghazi, as the martyr a lot. But when it comes down to it, they will spend millions of rupees on making sure that they don't get the death penalty. So if Ilmuddin was there before partition, he was one of the first people who went ahead and killed someone. Now he said, I did it so that, मैं अपनी जान कुर्बान के लिए तैयार हूँ. But then why fight so hard to get a reprieve? The same happened with Qadri. Like, he really wanted to not be hanged. He didn't want to sacrifice his life. He wanted to kill. And I didn't want him to die because I sympathize with his son. I still do. He's one of my biggest motivating factors that we're failing his son. He goes to every jalsa and he's going to turn into Qadri because I can't connect with him. He's surrounded by people. So we're failing him as a system. We're failing the children, which is what Swipe is about as well, failing children. But Qadri also did not want to die. And so there's nothing virtuous about this form of sacrifice. On the other hand, if there's an Olympics of the least, of the ugliest form of violence, it'd probably go to the dispassionate button, kill whoever you want to kill, a bit of collateral, sure. There is still something honorable about a fight which is fair fight. But then again, in suicide bombing, there's so much collateral. It's still not like a old-fashioned war. It's still something in which there's a collateral. And a lot of the times, psychologically speaking, these are people who are reacting and coping, and they're kidding themselves. It's self-deception that I'm sacrificing. They're tired of life. They're looking for something beyond what they have. So yeah, these ideas, oftentimes the reason they're romanticized these days, at least, or for these concepts, at least, terrorism or extrajudicial killing, it's hypocritical, and it's because we have a huge history of it being honorable. And maybe there was a time where it was, but today is not that time.
Why is this love being portrayed in this way?
Number one, I talk directly to people because of my connections, Khatm Nabuwat, with Jamaat Islami, with Ahrar people. The people who were behind the law, they thought first, because I came in connection with Jamaat, they thought I was from the Jamaat, so I was one of them. So they revealed very clearly to them that they lied. And their thing was that we have to fight these new human rights secular ideas that Zia had finally given. Zia, by the way, did not make the law. Zia was against the law, probably because of some US Republican pressure, which were giving them dollars for Afghanistan. So on the floor, Zia's government said, we don't need another blasphemy law. So that's a rhetoric that's been wrong for a while, Zia's law. But Zia had given them a way of life, right, from the 80s onwards, which was not as similar as what Pakistan was before that. And all of a sudden, all these people who do not represent the majority of community felt threatened. So Asma Jahangir would come in and talk about evidentiary requirement of women. And God bless her, she said that if it's half evidence for women, then do this as well. And she was irreverent in the way she talked about it. And Ahsan Iqbal's mother, Begum Nisar Fatma, who was one of the architects of the law as well, her, Ismail Qureshi, Liaquat Baloch, who was a very young guy at the time, a very young Ansar Abbasi, very young, like 17, 18. These people came together at various points of 80s and especially late 80s. They were the most authentic thing that I can talk about, the thought leaders, not people yet. Because people, remember, there's an increase of 2,100% cases after the law is passed, and extrajudicial killing, I think 13,000%. So after the law is passed, you would expect the killings to be lower, but you had 3 extrajudicial killings before that and 75 after. So the law didn't do anything to bring order. They manufactured a need in people, starting with the law, then in the social, then in the judiciary area, and then at the end, the social arena. The thought leaders, the only thing that I found authentic was an anxiety that our way of life is at threat. That these women, VAF, these 80s movements against, they're gonna bring in secular ideas. And I heard it from everyone. I heard it from Fareed Paracha, Jamaat Islami General Secretary. I heard it from Ismail Qureshi, that there is wisdom, maslahat, there's the greater good in lying about this so that we fight a greater evil, which is the secular elite who want to turn this country into something it was never meant to be. So that anxiety is real. The KKK had real anxiety. People who commit great acts of violence need something emotionally. And sometimes we do add fuel to the fire sometimes. We do escalate. So in a common person, let's say, not a thought leader who's lying, but like now there is a real anxiety amongst people. So now I'm talking about people who are not aware of the behind the scenes. They do experience real offense. They experience real emotional injury, quote unquote, and an anxiety of what's going on. What's going on? I can't make sense of this world. I can't make sense of a world where someone can draw this, someone can paint this, or someone can wear this, all of those things. the way that part's okay, experiencing that anxiety is okay, and they have that. The way we have not allowed them to express that anxiety in any way, because we don't have arts, because we have not, for example, loving the Prophet. If planting a tree who's loving the Prophet seems like such a radical idea right now, it's not. It's never been. It's always been a very common idea. You plant a tree, you pet an animal. You've heard stories growing up, but you never actually see it happen, because it's been obfuscated and manufactured that the only anxiety you need to experience is that these blasphemers, these anti-state seculars, are out to get your way of life. And the only way to react and don't respond, don't deliberate, don't reflect, react, is through violence. And that is love. And that's manufactured, and people are eating it up. And there is a lot of explanation to it, but that's the most I can really come up with in this passage of time. But I have written about it sometimes. There's a lot of psychological elements to it as well. Like, people are sometimes curious as well. What did he say? They would go outside of the Thana. Look, if you're really that offended and you can't hear a word, why do you want to know? There's some kind of stimulation and high that they get from being offended. All of a sudden, life is exciting. You look at mob violence and you will see some people would be laughing. Children would be having way too much fun, unfortunately. So all of
this is not obviously relegated to just religious groups. This is everyone around the world is now enjoying being offended.
Yes. And that excitement that it brings to maybe an otherwise really boring, dull life without substance and meaning. And all of a sudden you're like, I have a higher purpose. I'm protecting an honor of someone up there that I revere really severely. So my anxiety is, that's my truth, quote unquote. And the only difference is, okay, sure, that's your truth. How you react and respond to it, it seems very new, and all of it is very new. This is the as modern, the blasphemy laws, the way we respond, react, all of these things as modern as an American Pie. The most modern thing you can think of. There's nothing, and what they claim constantly is the most ancient thing. That 1400 years of history has been like this. No, don't lie.
Right. Yeah. Don't rewrite history for your. Yeah.
And that's what they're doing. They're revising history. So that's why we live in such an Orwellian world, because these things are happening. Love equals kill. You're like, what? Yeah. And you're consistently taking terms out. Don't kill, take don't out. Passing a law. No one knows about it.
That's mad. I can't believe that happened.
I'll share the article with you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, if you search Untold Story of Pakistan's Blasphemy Law, you'll get the blog article, but also get the bigger report. And that lays it down with proof, with substance. It's been used by the Supreme Court as well. It's the Council of Islamic Ideology signed it up that we're going to use it. The Ministry of Human Rights said we'll use it. But no one wants to use it. It's like, who's going to do it? It's very difficult to say this thing. But at least we felt that we used a language that was culturally relevant. We weren't saying, oh, the law is against United Nations Resolution 57, and therefore freedom of expression requires us that blasphemy law should be repealed. Doesn't make any sense for you to say that. Why should someone care about a resolution that was passed in 1948 for which people had no idea? No one asked them if they agreed to that particular right. They have no idea where that right comes from. It was written by Christian missionaries, historically speaking. So why should they care? They're at an intersection of cultural and religious history, human rights, and constitution lies a language, I feel, that is indigenous enough and principled enough that I think could resonate with people. There's a reason I'm not dead, and I've said very clear conclusions that the blasphemy law is wrong. I've said it so many times, so many places, but I haven't said it for the wrong, in reasons and in process that sometimes maybe I think our progressive activists have done, which is that it's just wrong because it's against human rights. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
For people, that doesn't mean anything.
What are human rights?
What are human rights? Yeah. Or saying something like Islam doesn't have blasphemy laws. That doesn't mean anything. Or Islam is peace. Doesn't mean anything.
So how did you get around? How are you getting around that? Because I completely agree with you. What is human rights? It doesn't mean anything to a lot of people.
Yes. So get around that by finding out what does mean to people. So I remember reading a text by Qasim Zaman on authority in South Asia, ulama and authority, that there's a mix, that looking at religion not as religion but as history is very crucial, as a tradition is very crucial. So I remember there were a few anxieties that some of the human rights activists had, that are you playing in their pitch? Is this going to be religion versus religion? I was like, I'm not trying to interpret religion for anyone, but what they are trying to do is turn religion into a monolithic idea. That here is this religion, it says Islam. Islam says this.
Ideology.
An ideology that has only one meaning.
Right.
As opposed to a tradition, which by definition is a fluid, competing thing. You've got like 7, 8 opinions on every question. That's what tradition usually is. Musical tradition, religious tradition. But when the moment you go like religion and Islam, this new modern way of thinking, Islam iske bare mein kya kehta hai? As if Islam is a human being and there will only be one answer. Usually, traditionally speaking, people used to ask, according to this scholar, what is his opinion on this question?
Right.
So that's why you would have 8, 9 different positions. So our approach to answer that question, what is human rights, is to figure out, what is the principle? There are a lot of academics who've worked on this, especially Anwar Ayman from University of Toronto. He's the head of law, he's the head of Islamic studies, who looks into human rights and Islamic law intersection. So that. B, what does it mean for us to look into tradition, historically speaking, so that we are not trying to tell people what religion is, we're trying to tell people what their tradition is, because people derive a lot of authority from things that are ancient. And that's what got the blasphemy law its legitimacy in the first place. Hey, it's always been like this, by the way. And when you tell people, hold on, the opposite is true, it's always been the other way around. So that was one way, at least in this issue, that we could talk about. So when I present you 50 texts, some brought in original manuscripts, scanned, translated in English, Urdu, and you can see it. And then you can see what someone else is doing. And there's no doubt in the reader's mind, okay, so he's not interpreting anything. He's not saying blasphemy law is right. I'm not saying blasphemy law is wrong. I'm not saying Islam says this. I'm saying they claimed that the punishment for this is XYZ because all of these scholars from Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf, Tamartashi, Ibn Abidin, the founders of Deoband have said this. And then I bring those texts and I show it to them. It's like they said the opposite. In some cases something different, some cases opposite. Then there's not a lot to be offended by. There is a bit of anxiety. Okay, what do I do? Because it's like having a dream and then you wake up and you realize you dream that, your partner said something terrible to you. And you wake up, you're still having that feeling, it's not true. So it's that kind of state. You're still angry at me.
Yeah.
But you're like, okay, you're not saying anything because I'm just a literature review. I'm a vessel trying to connect tradition to a local politics and local religious conflict. But at the same time, in spirit, trying to remain true and committed to human rights in context of Pakistan and trying to figure out what that means. And that's where Shehri came in. Okay, how do you bring civic rights ideas to the idea of Shehri? Because citizenship means a lot more in the West because of the civil rights movement, because of the slavery abolishment, because of the feminist movements, the women's rights, and then Martin Luther King. But Shehri has always meant Bashanda. You live here. That's it, full stop. So partly what the second thing we wanted to do was blasphemy law as a symptom. At the heart of it is that we haven't really defined what civic rights are for us. Where do they come from? Why do they mean so much to us? So Shehri Pakistan was an attempt to imbibe the word Shehri with meanings that go beyond you live here. It's you, the state works for you. They serve you.
Right.
And these are your rights and you get to fight for it. And it's not as aggressive as a brand. So what we started off is just an educational platform. But Hashia allows us to do the same with history then. So they're all connected in this way that with different editorial tones, we're trying to answer that exact same question then. Then how do you say it? If not, you're not going to say it's against human rights.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of thought we would go into this podcast talking about animation and like, oh, it's nice hand-drawn stuff. I feel completely out of my depth, but...
We're still going to talk about the animation. I'm here to promote my film as well. But yes, please.
Plug what you need to plug. But like, how do you... Actually, before we go into that, like, I think it's interesting you keep using the word anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's easy to delve into like, or slip into like pop psychology with it when it comes to this stuff. Like psychoanalyzing people like, oh, they're showing their repressed anxieties in this manner or whatever. But the word anxiety, I think, is a really useful one to have, at least, because you do have, like, everyone has this underlying feeling of something not being right in society. And I'm not talking about any specific law. I mean, just generally, right? You have general systemic anxieties, whether it's about climate change. You might not be like, it's climate change, but you're like, I feel like everything's going to shit. Why do I feel like this? Why do I feel like there's no hope? Or whatever it might be. So those anxieties do eventually end up bubbling to the surface in some way.
Yeah.
So when it comes to something like Sher Tabassum, you showed that anxiety as being this kind of cyberpunky kind of society. And with Swipe, you've shown it also with technology and, you know, all this other stuff. So is that really what how do you interpret anxieties in society, and how do you stop that from just being sort of a kind of pop psychoanalysis, being like, oh, that then transfers into this thing?
I mean,
how do you just stop from dumbing it down?
Right. So yeah, at the risk of being reductive and just
right.
Yeah. So obviously the anxiety. So when I use the word anxiety, it's also a term just outside of clinical psychology, just a sense of conflict that you're experiencing in the middle. But the good thing is that my ex-wife, God bless her, she is an exceptional psychologist with psychodynamic training, and she helped me a lot with one of our first paper that we wrote for Princeton was the psychology and theology of blasphemy and offense. So we tried to see it through.
You've been working on this a long time, right?
Yeah, I've been working on it a long time.
That's why you know your shit.
Yeah, I mean, at least when it comes to this, I know my shit. Yeah.
Is that why you're confident about it? Is that why you know the limits of discourse?
I think so. Yeah, I think time does that. Also, I think commitment does that. Like, there's a sense of, yeah, I'm committed to this, and I know that what my intent is. I know what my deepest intent is. It does not come from an egoic self. It comes from a higher need. So that self-awareness helps as well. So that, I think, yeah. But so we did that study as well, and we did questionnaires, we did questions, and there's a lot of political psychology work all over the world. That, let's say, gun control. Gun control
yeah.
In America. What do people feel when someone says that we're going to take your guns away?
Yeah.
Right. So where does anxiety come in that? Or cognitive versus intuitive faculties. So what part of your brain, they would do scans, lights up when you listen to something that feels like an attack on your way of life. So there are neurological scientific evidences that point towards this being a reasonable enough thesis to make, that one of the underlying sentiments behind all of this is at least fear-based, because anxiety is a form of fear. You are afraid of something, but then also we coded language a lot. So when I did interviews, there was this, someone's out to get us. There's a conspiracy. They want to take away this from us, and most of it factually inaccurate. So explained by one of the things that explains that is anxieties, and other things too, power in some instances. So when it comes to filmmaking, one of the things is that it is important for me to first tell a good story, for it to be somewhat entertaining as well.
It's not an academic paper.
Yeah, it's not a paper. That's the whole point. That all of this, from scoring and music and paper and videos and explainers and short video things, everything may be saying somewhat a similar thesis statement of egalitarian values, and but in various ways. So first and foremost, it should be an interesting story. It should be visually, it should be a film. It's a film. And most people weren't getting this out of it at all, what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly okay. In fact, I would rather have that, because that hits at a much deeper. I don't want people to be convinced that blasphemy law is wrong through these films at all.
Yeah.
What I really want a lot more is them to reflect on where does that hit them.
Right.
And sometimes it resonates with them being on the subjected side of it. So for example, certain women talking about how they feel, being surveyed, and some students talking about toxic positivity at their homes, to the other side as well. Okay, am I, especially people who are on the fence, do I add to unfair violence, or do I add to violence by something that I say that seems very innocuous on Twitter, that that person is a Qadiani, when I know he's not, just that happens so many times. So no, I don't think the film is even claiming to do that. So it can't dumb down something that it's not claiming to do. It does try to look into these anxieties, but not in an academic way, not in a clinical way. It's the same way, when you look at Mr. Robot, the TV show, I mean, it's a cyberpunk film. And the director said, I wanted to make a cyberpunk film that does not look like what a cyberpunk film because I'm tired of flying cars. Mm-hmm. And I think The Swipe is the same thing in some ways, because it is a cyberpunk film without the neon lights, without the flying cars, because both of them are looking into how corporations can take over and manipulate people. In this case, corporation plus radical Islam, profiting off people's sentiments. So that's also an exploration of people's anxieties, even the protagonist's anxieties. But it's not necessarily, I mean, although they did a lot of research, but the claim wasn't we're going to be exactly talking about what anxiety is.
I mean, I think some of the worst art can come out of that kind of thinking, right? Where it's like, I have this objective to do and I have to fulfill that objective, and that's how we just get to point A to point B. How much of that is... are you aware of, like, when you're making like a new short film or whatever, or when you're working on these kind of projects, are you like, well, I have to figure this thing out for myself, and this piece of art is a way of me figuring it out? It's not like I already come into it with my thesis statement and let's just try and find a way to make this entertaining. It's not like trying to put an academic paper into a film, right?
It's not.
It's more like, I also don't know. So how do we move through this mist?
I would say, I mean, in my case, in both of these things, it was neither of the two. What it really was, I wanted to make an entertaining film when it come to Shahriar Tabassum. I wanted to make a film that was about us. Now, you write stories about things that you feel passionately about. And there was an idea, we wrote about it. For me, and I would never discuss with the team or the animators that this is what the film is about. That for me, because everyone knew what the film was about for them. And even within the team, because it's a very collaborative production, both of these films, it's very different. I'm coming here and I'm talking about what it means to me.
You're not a dictator.
Not at all. I mean, I'm anything but. They're asking
me
to
be... Is that true? Okay.
People are asking me to be dictators in the office. Come on, tell us to do it again. But I'm anything but. I'm not a perfectionist. Anything but.
Best, yeah. I love that attitude. I like failing.
Yeah.
People should be more okay with failing.
More okay with failing. And even like when people come in and these are really talented kids, they come in and they're like, Arfad bhai, abhi it's not completed. It's like, it's complete. It's like, no, you see this error. It's like, no, it's perfect. If that's what you want to hear, it's perfect. And eventually, a year down the line, they realize what the philosophy, the culture is, and they're comfortable with it. But that's otherwise... the more important thing for me is being authentic.
Wow. The guy has a very big bike. He has a very big something, at least.
Yes.
He wants to show us.
Yes, compensate yourself.
Let's let him...
we get it.
Yeah.
But the more important thing than perfectionism...
Take a second, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
He has to really hammer that point home.
Yeah, so... I'm comfortable with that, but when it comes to obviously, so 6 out of 10 for PS public awareness campaign. So we did a lot of coronavirus animations for countries outside of Pakistan, for Pakistan, for the government. No, we can't wait.
Yeah.
2 months.
Yeah, this frame is not good. Let's just keep working on it for another month.
Yeah, or like what a nikah nama is. No, women need to know it right now. We're gonna miss out. So on the other hand, the 2 films, however. Obviously it's a visual medium, so I did say, okay, we're 9 out of 10 now, but the 1 is still left. We are going to end up making a film that is flawed, because that's okay, and that's okay as long as we are being authentic. And I have to keep reminding everyone that. And another way that I'm saying that I'm not a dictator and it's very collaborative is everybody does bring a lot to the table, especially with Shahriar Tabassum. I mean, Isma Gul Hassan was the creative director, visually just really made sure that it didn't become very derivative as it could have. By the end, because of some of the textures, it did still look like something that you don't necessarily see before, the way things moved. And with Swipe, again with Haseeb, everybody brings something to the table. So the cases that you have on the phone, we're like, okay, everybody come up with a case. Something absurd, something funny, something hilarious, something really out of that won't happen. So in that way, it's collaborative. It's definitely not dictatorial. I think one thing that I can say very confidently. Before COVID, we were 22 people, and then the COVID was a real challenge to make sure that the team remains, and we did have to scale it down. Then we're going back up. One thing, anyone who comes in here, most of the people do find it to be a very nourishing space, because we're not there for productivity. The process matters. Being nurturing and kind to yourself and others matters, and just remembering what our intent is matters. And with this film, I was just talking to everyone again today that our deepest intent is not to prove ourselves as filmmakers. It's not to make just a pretty looking film. It's to project our voice confidently in a space that's being shrinking. Just project it confidently, and that projection of our voice that is honest is a nourishing thought. And that is a higher consciousness. That's a higher meaning. So, and everybody's on the same page for that. That's my job as a director, really, to bring that shared vision to the table. Why and how are we doing this? The what part is very collaborative.
Are you optimistic, pessimistic when you look at the future of this stuff?
So the first thing is something that James Baldwin said. Someone asked him that question. Not that I'm saying I'm James Baldwin in this context, but I cannot afford not to be. It's just not a choice. What I've chosen as a way of life, almost. Like we tested for Corona, and we locked ourselves in the office, the 5 of us. And we slept there, worked there to make sure that we didn't need to. No one was putting pressure on us.
Clearly, toxic positivity.
We did have some incidents. So it became a very, everybody's just very passionate about it, and it wasn't like an instruction on my behalf before any workers' right movement comes at me. No. It was something that people recommended as well, and we had a great time. It was a really passionate recommitment to what we work on. I cannot afford to not be optimistic. There are a million other things that we could do. We could just be an animation agency. We could be a think tank for World Bank. If we choose, obviously there are times when it's really, I think but I fear more. I'm optimistic in overall in general. What I fear is losing earnestness, becoming more concerned with, that's basic, that's artistic, that's forgetting what authenticity, and being more about, how do we look? Who's impressed? Who's not? Which festival are we in? Which are we not? Those are all secondary, if any, to forget the most earnest and the most crucial, and what I would call the most deepest intent. What is our deepest intent, as opposed to an intent that comes from fear and ego, and which is for everyone. Someone has an imposter syndrome, someone has, insecurity, and all of that exists, and sure. But we're not here to tell the story to prove to ourselves that we are not imposters, or that I'm good enough dad, or all of those things.
Right.
Sure, those could be things that can happen in the process, but to remind yourself...
You're calling me out?
Nah, that's for another room. You and another person in another different room.
So what do you say to yourself in the mirror every morning? Because mine is, am I good enough, Dad? And I'm just joking, obviously.
I mean, I think my parents
What's your intent?
My parents are strangely proud of me. They absolutely hate what I do because it stands for everything that's against them.
Right.
But they also say everything, mashallah, that you've touched, it's been successful and you've established it. Why don't you do the same? Why don't you start a channel for Quran? Right? And it would be great. And it's fair. Their question is fair. So in a way, that validation I can derive somehow. I can still extract something out of it. That's something I do. If someone gives me a compliment, there's this thing that people are difficult. It's difficult for them to accept compliments. I'm very good with it. You can say something and you don't even mean it. Let's say I'll still take it. I'll hack it. I'll tell them it's fantastic. And even the validation bit. So I don't what I keep telling. It's so human. It's so wonderful to say, hey, listen, I need some validation. And we do it at our studio all the time. We get around and we say, okay, what do you like about this person? So everybody goes in rounds and rounds because everybody needs validation. I've come in so many times because I would have a bout of clinical depression. I would come into the office, listen, I'm not failing you guys, am I? So tell me if this has been a nourishing experience for you. And these people in my team, they're incredibly loving and respectful, but they're incredibly loving. And so they would tell me, okay, and that's important for me, and that's fine. You know, that experience, and so that you get that out of the way, so that again, you're not limbically hijacked, and you're not coming from an experience of, oh, I want to validate myself, I'm doing this so that I know, okay, I don't fail them. That you're clear, that you want to project an honest, confident voice on a space that is also yours. And that's the important part in this case.
Yeah. That's pretty alien concept to me. Because in the sense that like so much of the creative process is driven from some kind of inner anxiety, right? Maybe the technical aspect is am I good enough at this? And then you work on that. So like, I know what you're saying. Is it just because you got to a point where you've like, I've received the compliments that I need to receive. Now I'm fine with the stage I'm at. I mean, early on in your career, was it motivated by some inner anxiety?
So two parts. Number one, I do experience all of these anxieties in different things. So for example, in things where I perhaps I'm more vulnerable. Let's say if I score part of it, because I'm not publicly known as a musician, but I've made a lot of music, but I've never really, and I've always wanted to, but I had to quote unquote sacrifice that to do some of these things. Now, when the music would come out, Shari Tabassum came out, and when Swipe's music will come out, so this is what happened. I was talking to the people, I was telling them about what is my limbic hijack I need to look out for. So I was like, I was scoring for Swipe, and I forgot that there was Image, and suddenly I wasn't scoring for Image.
Right.
I was scoring for doing something fancy or a melody that people are going to notice. And they're like, oh, who did the score? And that's the hijack, that's the anxiety. Right. And that's always going to be there. There's this brilliant woman, Tara Brach, who's a PhD psychologist as well as a Buddhist philosopher, who talks about this idea that it is going to come in, who talks about limbic hijack and the higher consciousness. And she's talked about it's going to happen. Then you're going to just be kind to yourself about that. It's okay. I have this anxiety. It's human to have that anxiety. You're not going to be like, oh my God, why do I have this anxiety? Why am I now not a higher consciousness? Why am I not in Nirvana? Why am I not a Buddhist? No, that's not that. So being
time's running.
No, it's like, it's okay. It's okay that I wanted to make a melody that was more like, this is Pakistan's Trent Reznor. That came to me because I had this idea and it was working. I was like, oh, this sounds like a Desi Trent Reznor with the tablas thing, man. Then I cut it out because it wasn't serving the higher purpose. So, but the earlier part of my career, quote unquote, journey, I think, was driven by a lot of anxiety and anger. Yes, because there was an inner conflict that I was trying to resolve, trying to find my identity in a way that was driven by anger. How could you lie? So if I had to make a documentary at that time, it would be a very gotcha documentary. Oh, you were lying, weren't you? I got you. Now, if I were to make a documentary, I would still give them a margin space to have some kind of self-respect.
Right.
That difference, I think, came from really staying committed to a singular vision. Even if the things that we work on is very broad, there is something singular that I come back to every day. And there is the culture that's very crucial, that it's kind. So if you're going to be kind to yourself and you're going to be kind to others, and you reinforce that constantly in the office environment, because work is what you make of it. So the capitalist system has told us work is supposed to be 9 to 5 high productivity, but the process matters, and what productivity, how we define it, matters. So if with kindness and nourishment we can do that to each other, eventually we might be able to extend that to ourselves, which is difficult, and then to who we otherize. So can you empathize with Qadri, and do you need to? Do you need to understand how a Qadri is made in this country? Do you need to empathize with millions of children right now who have no exposure to things that you and I have, and the only thing that they know is same thing that they sing every day in the morning, Gustakhi Rasool ki ek hi saza. Can you empathize? And what's that line? Where do you refuse to empathize? Where does it become that Hannibal TV season where you're empathizing with someone who's a serial killer, and you become apologetic for people who don't deserve it?
Yeah.
So it's all connected in that sense. But yeah, I have experienced that anxiety. I do continue to experience it. Even when I was coming in here, I was thinking, oh, what am I going to say? You know, wonderful people have come here, and what does it mean for me to be here talking to you? I usually wouldn't, for this precise reason, because we wanted to be an institution. I wouldn't come on television. People would call me on television because the article was very popular, and I was like, I wouldn't come on television because it's very easy to fall into the trap of becoming a face. Oh, here's a person who's an activist who's going to change the blasphemy law, as opposed to an institution, which is bigger than me. Right. So I want to retire, and you know, I can't name her because she's not sure if she wants to. She's going to take over. Someone else is going to take over, and that's an institution. I'm going to move on to something else maybe, and that, as long as I keep a check on that this is not just about me even being here, is more than just trying to tell people, hey, listen, I'm a musician as well. Because I did want that.
Right. Even now?
Want that. I mean, a part of me, does that, because I never got to share that with people. And it's okay. It's okay that I want that. I'm comfortable with that part. But doing that at the expense of what's more important at this point, I'm representing a team of people and their hard work, wouldn't be that good.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So music is more personal to you, I guess.
Yes, and that's where I'm most vulnerable. That's where, you know, validation or invalidation could get to me very easily, especially not the technical side of it, but the musicality of it, or oh, that didn't do anything for me, that didn't hit me, or, you know, that's not new. So that's where I think would be most vulnerable, because I think I haven't, never had the time to do a lot of it, and yeah, that's where my most child self would come in, I'd say.
I think we're going to finish on this point, I think, because we've already gone over the time. But one of the things that I like most about music is that I don't understand it. Like, I have a literature degree, film, you know, you understand composition and why things work and why things don't. Music, I have no idea. Do you have like, I guess after you've made music, that magic fades away? Like, that's why I have no I would like to know music theory, but I'm also scared. I'm like, yeah, once I know it, I know the gears behind it, and you see how it works. Do you have a thing like that? Do you have an art that you're just like, I don't know how that works, and I'm happy not knowing?
So I'm much more happy knowing the technicalities behind animation, illustration, color theory, all of the things. Now the thing with music is, there was a time, so for a brief moment, I had a band with Shorbanur, and we released a couple of songs as well, including the last song, Sharita Basum.
He did a song for
was us jamming in the studio.
Nice.
And so when I would jam with him, he was like, let's start writing music together. Let's learn notations. Let's learn functional harmony, because for him it was very intuitive. His harmonic knowledge is vast, and mine wasn't. So I did try forcing. So I do obviously know a lot of music theory, but when I tried forcing it a little bit, I think I started losing authenticity. More than not having fun, I started losing authenticity, because the thing is, as a poet, if you're there's prose and poetry that you'd read, it doesn't have to use every word in the dictionary. So you can have, let's say you have 50,000 words that you know of, and someone else has 500,000 words that they know of. Both of them can write beautiful poetry and beautiful prose. It's the same thing with music. Like Brian Eno made wonderful music, and it's not like diminished ninths and whatever. And and similarly, there are beautiful musicians who do that precisely because they know music theory. And then there's some very gifted individuals who do everything, but have no idea how it came, and they're just gifted. Yeah. But for me, I do try to keep away from theory, so that I can be, my biggest thing is I want to be authentic. So whatever I say, I don't care if it's simple, I don't care if it's complex, as long as it honestly reflects what I feel. Because at the end of the day, if I'm not doing music for a commercial, or let's say a purpose, or for a project, if I'm doing it for myself, then I need it to resonate. I'm doing it to reflect. So when I play it back, I want to know more about myself, because there are certain things that words cannot communicate. Oh, so this is how I feel. And words betrayed me, language betrayed me, but music never betrays me. Hasn't betrayed me so far.
Right.
So I think that's partly it, that I try to stay away from the theoretical aspect of it.
Arafat, thank you so much for coming on. That was half went over my head, but not over my head, but that was out of my depths. But that was interesting, really interesting to talk about, and I hope people found it interesting as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I hope that it doesn't end up being too dense or boring, because
definitely not boring, but just like a lot. And I think I missed a lot of questions that I could have asked you. If it actually could have gone on for 3.5 hours, but let's cut it where it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks so much, dude.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.